everyone, and hope you're doing great today. This beautiful third Tuesday of February 2025, Tuesday, February 18, 2025. Have you been? How's your month been? Hope you have had a great, productive, fruitful, and fulfilling month thus far. Today, we are very excited to bring in the 7th edition of Developing National Innovation Systems for Absorptive Capacity. I repeat, the 7th edition of Developing National Innovation Systems for Absorptive Capacity. It's been very interesting being on this journey with you, trying to dissect what a national innovation system is, looking at innovation, the process of innovation, looking at the system, what makes it a system, the imperative of having a system. We've also been looking at the absorptive capacity part of it. We've looked at policy, and then last week, we began to look at talent management strategies for national innovation systems. I repeat, talent management strategies for national innovation systems, and we promise to continue that this week to delve into it a bit more before we move on to another sub-theme, right? So last week, by the way, was the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. It was the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, and it was also the 10th anniversary of the celebration of women and girls in science. So in looking at talent management strategies for national innovation systems last week, we also tried to look at the gender inclusivity factor. We zoomed the lens a little bit on the factor of gender inclusivity in talent management strategies, right? And just before we do a recap of some of the main points of last week, like we always do, let me highlight something that was critical in this gender inclusivity factor, right? We said that according to UNESCO, that's the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, right, is a sub-entity within the United Nations. According to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, women constitute less than 30% of the world's researchers. And then when it comes to cutting-edge fields like artificial intelligence, that number further drops to just 22%. Right. And one thing we said last week is that this is not a problem that is going to solve itself. We are going to need talent management strategies for national innovation with a deliberate focus on gender inclusivity. I repeat, that statistics is not going to change itself, right? We are going to need talent management strategies for national innovation with a deliberate focus on gender inclusivity. So let me now go to some of the other highlights of last week's session. Remember, you can always watch all of this, listen to all of this on our YouTube page. Please subscribe to our YouTube page, Amogate Radio Communications. There is a lot of rich information available across different topics, policy, economics, geopolitical issues, all kinds of things that can benefit nations, institutions, organizations, and as well as leaders and individuals. Extremely important. So last week, we started by asking one of the questions we asked was, what are the kind of talent management strategies that can help innovation systems, right? What are the kind of talent management strategies that can help innovation systems? And in answering that question, we emphasize that when you're talking about policies, everything must be done intentionally. Very, very important, especially when you're now talking about responsive policies. You're not reacting, you're responding, right? So when you're talking about policy and strategy, you're not talking about reacting, you're talking about creating. So if you want to ask the question of talent management strategies that can help innovation systems, you have to begin by saying, what exactly is the vision for the National Innovation System? What do we want to achieve with this National Innovation System? Extremely important. You have to begin by articulating the vision for your nation in terms of innovation. It is when you have articulated this vision that you can then begin to say what will be the contribution of talent to this vision. What is the role of talent in achieving this vision? What kind of talent do we need in terms of numbers and also in terms of specific skills, right, and competencies that are required to drive this vision? Extremely important, right? So we said that you have to begin the talent management strategy for national innovation by articulating the vision for your nation in terms of national innovation. You have to say, where do we want to go, right? How much of our GDP, for instance, do we want to be driven by science and innovation, right? And then how much of our GDP do we want to be contingent upon factors we can control? We emphasize that. One of the reasons why we need to focus a lot on innovation as a nation is because that way you are creating and you are less vulnerable to shocks, global shocks that you cannot control. Right now, the administration of President Donald Trump in the United States is focused on increasing the production of oil, and that is likely to drive down oil prices. So if your country is excessively dependent on oil prices, you can't do much about that. That may be a factor way beyond your control. But when it comes to innovation, right, what you do is that you are now allowing your GDP to be determined more by factors you can control, right? Because the reality is that if you can create a plan for innovation, like we said last week, and follow through on it, you are going to be more in control, anticipating and determining, shaping and reshaping global elements rather than waiting and reacting to what other nations are doing. Extremely important. So these are things you need to put into your national innovation strategy, not just as part of the vision, but also as part of the motivation for the vision. Part of why we want to, develop national innovation systems, invest in the human capital required for driving the national innovation strategy is to ensure that we are determining what happens on the global scale rather than reacting to what is happening, what other nations are doing through innovation. So when a nation creates a national innovation strategy and ensures that there are systems to support it, they would also have to say what the talent needs are to drive the strategy. They will have to determine, they will have to, anticipate, they will have to plan how to meet the talent needs required to drive the strategy. We give the example, for instance, an hypothetical example, for instance, that if a nation decides that its national innovation strategy will be driven by cost optimization, especially in these days of open innovation, where innovation is becoming more and more quote unquote free, but you are still finding a way to commercialize that seemingly free innovation, right? So if a nation decides to focus on cost optimization, they will have to say what are the kind of talent needs that they need for this. For instance, the intentional development of a mix of skills that has an underlying multidisciplinary orientation would be important for a cost optimization national innovation strategy. I'll say that again. For instance, the intentional development of a mix of skills and multidisciplinary orientation would be important for a cost optimization national innovation strategy, and also to pursue the element of innovation as coordination, which we spoke about 3 episodes ago. So that way, the path to the commercialization of innovation will be smoother for many nations if their talent management strategy has already been intentional about creating a mix of skills and developing a multidisciplinary orientation in their talent. So instead of having scientists who just think scientifically or economists who just think economically, that nation will have scientists who are developing ab initio with an intent for the commercialization of innovation, which is what absorptive capacity is all about. It's about how do we not just create knowledge, not just acquire knowledge, but also use knowledge for economic and social development. So if your national innovation strategy would determine the talent management process, your national innovation vision will determine your talent management strategy for national innovation. Extremely important. It all begins with a vision, right? Extremely important. So again, we talked about the current contribution. Last week, we said we're going to revert on what the current contribution of science and innovation is to GDP in a nation like Nigeria and also in a nation like India. And I'm going to give you some of the statistics on that because like we said, when you're trying to articulate a vision or you're trying to develop a strategy, even for talent management, you have to begin by saying, where are we? A current situation assessment, very important. Where are we now? So let's look at the current contribution of science and innovation to GDPs. According to the U.S. official website of the International Trade Administration, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics report that the ICT sector, that's the information communication and technology sector, contributed about 20% growth to Nigeria's real GDP in Q2 2024. I'll say that again. According to the U.S. official website of the International Trade Administration, The National Bureau of Statistics report, that's the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, reports that the ICT sector, the information communication and technology sector, contributed about 20% growth to Nigeria's real GDP in Q2 of 2024, right? They also said that the government of Nigeria, that's the National Bureau of Statistics, Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, said the government of Nigeria released the National Digital Economy Policy for 2020 to 2030. That's a decade, right? And it seeks to reorient the Nigerian economy to capitalize on the numerous opportunities that the digital economy offers, right? Again, the Nigerian Digital Economy Policy and Strategy Program is said to be based on 8 pillars. Those 8 pillars are 1, developmental regulation; 2, digital literacy and skills; 3, solid infrastructure; 4, service infrastructure; 5, digital services development and provision; 6, soft infrastructure; 7, digital and emerging technologies; and 8, indigenous content development and adoption. Now, these 8 pillars for the Nigerian digital economy policy and strategy is not necessarily going to be my focus today. I'm just saying the main thing I want to draw from that is that we had said last week that we would revert on data, like what exactly is the current contribution of innovation or digital economy to national GDP like that of Nigeria and India, right? So that's what we saw in terms of the contribution. And today we are not diving deep into that, like I said. But one thing to take note of is that one of the 8 pillars, right, of Nigeria's digital economy policy and strategy program is digital literacy and skills, right? Because they know that it's going to be critical to have sufficient skills to implement that digital policy and strategy, right? They identify that digital upskilling of local Nigerian talent is a priority for both the United States government and the Nigerian government, working in collaboration with the private sector. Now, this is the U.S. official website of International Trade Administration. They also went on to share some of the contributions of some private sector organizations of the United States. Take note, not the private sector organizations of the United States that have been working with Nigerian governments to upskill. They talked about major US technology firms that have launched their own training programs. They gave the example of Microsoft entering into a national partnership with the Nigerian government in 2021 to train 5 million youths across the country in technical skills. 5 million youths, right? In 2021, Microsoft entered into a national partnership with the Nigerian government to train 5 million youths across the country in technical skills. They also said Google, a US company, participated in several programs in Nigeria, including the Google Africa Development Scholarship Program, which provides training in mobile and web development, right? They also talked about the Digital Skills for Africa program, which is larger and aims to provide important digital skills, right? They said this Digital Skills for Africa program provides free training in internet marketing, web design, and data analytics. Furthermore, in May 2023, Cisco was said to have signed a deal with NITDA. We talked about NITDA, my guest 2 weeks ago, Mr. Reginald Bassi and I talked about NITDA. They said Cisco signed a deal with Nigeria's National Information Technology Development Agency to bridge Nigeria's digital divide, and they also launched a new Edge Center in Lagos. Edge stands for Experience, Design, Go to Market, and Earn, right? Edge again stands for Experience E, Design D, Go to Market G, and E, Earn. So they said that Cisco did not just sign a deal with Nigeria's National Information and Technology Development Agency, NITDA, but they signed this deal to bridge Nigeria's digital divide, and they launched this Edge Center in Lagos that provides incubation programs for SME, small and medium-scale enterprises. I believe my colleague, Dr. Titilo, will be happy to hear this because she's been talking a lot about the contribution of SMEs to national economies, employment, GDPs, and so on and so forth. And this is one thing that Cisco did in collaboration with NITA and the Nigerian government to bridge the digital divide. And they provided this incubation center in Lagos, this Edge Incubation Center for SMEs, right? They said the Cisco Network Academy is available at over 200 Nigerian tertiary institutions and has helped over 200,000 people improve their skills. Now, one of the things that I noted while researching this was that Nigeria was said to have Africa's largest mobile market. Now, that's not too surprising, right? Because it's the most populated country in Africa. We are said to be about 220 million people, like I said last week, and Nigeria has about 219 million subscribers. Can you imagine? 219 million subscribers. This was what was recently announced by the Nigerian Communications Commission, NCC, and they said we have a tele density, that's the penetration of telecoms. We have a tele density of 101.16%, over 100%. As at March 2024, more than 163 million Nigerians had internet access because of the growth of broadband mobile networks, the launch of affordable data plans, and the broadband penetration of 43.5%. Now, the quality may be questionable, may be an area of improvement, but the spread has been said to be notable, right? Now, the Nigeria's major ICT players, they said it comprises of 4 activities: telecommunications and information services, publishing, motion picture, sound recording, and music production, and then broadcasting. Of course, we are big on entertainment. So there is a possibility to further enhance innovation, right, in terms of our technological outputs when it comes to synchronizing entertainment, for instance, and the digital economy. We are big on entertainment, right? Music, movies. I think our movie industry is said to be the 3rd biggest in the world after Hollywood and Bollywood. Hollywood in the United States and Bollywood in India, right? I can confirm that and revert next week, but I think it's said to be the 3rd biggest, right? So what can we now, and this is why I keep talking about the national innovation strategy that is intentional. So if, for instance, Nigeria chooses to focus on enhancing digital economy for the entertainment industry globally, if that becomes a national innovation strategy, that, you know, one of the areas we want to compete globally is national innovation for entertainment, it can become an area where we then begin to develop skills strategically ahead of the need. Remember, it all begins with a vision, right? I said in closing last week that one of the most powerful things we can do for tomorrow is to envision it, because by envisioning tomorrow, it is easier to create the path for shaping tomorrow. You have to envision tomorrow first. Nigeria has to say, okay, we want to compete and we want to, determine what happens in terms of innovating for entertainment. I'm just using that as an example. Then we can begin to raise that mix of skills, the multidisciplinary orientation between arts and digital technology. And so we could say, for instance, today we're having a conversation in Amogate yesterday, and we said, YouTube has one simple goal. They may not state it, but it's implied, and that goal is to replace terrestrial television as it is currently known, right? They are positioning themselves for it. They are, in fact, you watch CNN today, you watch it on YouTube. You watch many TV stations today, they watch it on YouTube. It's not just that. I've been reading news where CNN is laying off staff, probably because of this model that is changing, right? It's becoming more of an internet TV than more of a terrestrial television. And this was very, very intentional. YouTube did not just, they did not just happen upon this, right? They were very intentional, and they were very strategic, and they were very continuous. And you can see the amount of revenue, ads revenue that is going to YouTube. This is where we begin to talk about commercialization of innovation, which has been the focus in more recent weeks on this program. We've talked about innovation at the beginning, not innovation systems. Now we are looking at commercialization, extremely important, the commercialization of innovation, which is what absorptive capacity is about. That's the ability to translate knowledge and innovation into economic and social development. So Nigerians say, what are the areas of our competitive advantage, right? It's not just enough to say, okay, we have this level of digital penetration or tele-density, since we know that, well, Our ICT players comprise mainly of four activities: telecommunications and information services, publishing, number two, number three, motion picture, sound recording and music production, and number four, broadcasting. We can choose the fourth one. In Amogate, we always talk about strategic prioritization a lot. We emphasize it a lot in strategy. It's important to look at the areas of your company, either your competitive advantage, your current competitive advantage, or your potential competitive advantage, and say, this is what we want to zoom in on, right? Extremely important. Now, it's probably heartwarming to hear that the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics reported that the telecom industry was the third largest contributor to real GDP in quarter two, 2024, after agricultural production and trading services, which generated 20.35% and 16.39% respectively. Now, that's heartwarming, but what was not too heartwarming for me is to know that within the country's digital economy space, the telecom industry is actually dominated by, if you ask me, foreign players, which include MTN, Airtel, and also Nine Mobile. Thankfully, Globalcom is one of the big players, but that is one of four big players, right? Four big players. You have MTN is not Nigerian owned. Airtel, as far as I know, is not Nigerian owned. Nine Mobile is not Nigerian owned. And you have only Globalcom being a Nigerian player. That is not good enough for our economy. We have to become, that's another thing we have to become. It's not enough to, the digital economy generated 20.35%. How much of this 20.35% is returned earnings for Nigeria, and how much of this is being exported? And I'm just using this as an example, right? Let me also quickly mention that we also have other nations working with Nigeria to develop Nigeria's digital skills, right? The Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, has also launched the Nigerian JICA Nigerian ICT program, through which JICA works with Nigerian government agencies to offer ICT training and technical assistance, right? So they also have the EU, the Nigerian Digital Ecosystem, also hosted the EU Nigeria Digital Economy Package, a 3-year package, 2021 to 2023, right? The EU announced under the Global Gateway Program that they will invest at least 820 million euros in Nigeria's digital transformation by providing assistance for Nigeria's digitization plan through a mix of 160 million euros in grants and 660 million in loans, right? Part of what they want to devote this 820 million euros to, part of what the EU, European Union, wants to devote this 820 million euros to is investment in digital infrastructure, the digitalization of public services, digital entrepreneurship, and of course, digital skills, as well as digital governance, right? Now, like I said, this is just an example of, I said I was going to revert on contributions so that we know where we are before we know where we can go to. And there's a whole lot I can talk about with respect to where we should be going to, right? Let's even talk about digital governance. How much of digital governance skills do we have? We talk about corporate governance today. Are we having digital governance certifications? Are we having the curriculum? Is it being reviewed to include digital governance, especially at management level? Because we already know that digital governance is a strong factor, particularly more so in the days of artificial intelligence, right? Like we said, I think 2 episodes ago, many times policy plays catch up with technology. Same thing with the legal frameworks, right? Now we already know that there are questions as to what is copyright on artificial intelligence, how much can you digitize existing content and claim all of the profits. These are questions being asked. Is our law curriculum anticipating and responding to this? Are we ahead of it? This is what it means to develop talent management strategies. Right. So thankfully, we have these people, we have these nations investing, but of course they are investing because at the minimum it's a symbiotic relationship. There are things they stand to gain as well. But we have to think strategically and say, how do we optimize our benefit? Now let's go to India very quickly. India has, and I'll just give one statistics for India, and then we'll talk a little bit more about talent management strategies for national innovation systems, and we begin to wrap up. So according to the India's Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, as well as their PIB, which is their Press Information Bureau, India's digital economy is estimated at 11.74% of the national income in 2022 to 2023. And that's equivalent to about $402 billion in GDP. In other words, the contribution of digital economy to India in 2022 to 2023 is less than 12%, while that of the digital economy to Nigeria in 2024, at least quarter 2 2024, was said to be 20%. Now, I don't want us to clap our hands and think we're doing well. And so I think that we need to still go back to the questions raised last week as to what is the total GDP of Nigeria as of today, which we found to be just about $300 billion, right? A little over $300 billion, a little over $300 billion, which is not sufficient at all. Because if you look at India's GDP, even that 11.74% contribution was estimated at $402 billion. Do you understand? Even India's 11.74% contribution of their digital economy to the GDP is significantly higher at $402 billion than the whole of Nigeria's GDP. So for me, the question of how do we grow this GDP is still very critical. The whole of Nigeria's GDP in 2023 was said to be $362.8 billion, the whole of Nigeria's GDP. Meanwhile, India's 11.74% digital economic contribution to their GDP was expected to be about $402 billion. So we have to think about how do we grow the GDP. The whole of India's GDP in 2023 was said to be $3.55 trillion USD. So the whole of India's GDP is still about 10 times more than the whole of Nigeria's GDP, just like that of the UK GDP. The whole of UK's GDP is $3.34 trillion USD in 2023, and the whole of India's GDP in 2023 is $3.55 trillion USD. So India's GDP is actually more than the UK's GDP. So exactly what, and don't misunderstand me, there are things to appreciate, but I think that there's a whole lot to be done to say, how do we grow? How do we, like we said last week, how do we quintuple this GDP over the next 5 years at the minimum? And then how does technology become, how does innovation become a driver for that growth? And then what are the talent management needs to ensure that, for instance, innovation becomes the reason why we quintuple our growth in the next 5 years? Extremely important. So it's not time to celebrate at all. There's a long way to go, right? We can do it. We can get there. Remember, one of the most powerful things we can do for tomorrow is to envision it. Because by envisioning tomorrow, it is easier to create the path to shaping tomorrow. And for me, one of the things we must envision about tomorrow is that we must, at the minimum, quintuple our GDP in Nigeria over the next 5 years. And other nations also have to look at it and say, what can we do? Where do we grow? What are the opportunities? And I've given a couple of examples, right? We can look at entertainment and digital economy and say, how do we run a model, for instance, like the YouTube? We have a lot of population in Nigeria. Imagine we created a platform like the YouTube, all the things being hosted by YouTube, all of the adverts, income going to YouTube would be going to that model. We can do it. It's very, very doable. Imagine we create a platform like Facebook. That means that all of the ads being generated by Facebook would move to that model, especially the one connected to the Nigerian audience. I'm not just talking about Nigerians, also those who follow Nigerians, those who follow the Nigerian audience. It would move. Same thing for Netflix, right? Netflix has a significant income today, and some of that income is tied to Nigerian content. So exactly what is it that we can do to begin to, say, okay, how do we get this? Get part of this, because we are creating platforms. I've always believed that those who create platforms are those who earn the most. Whether it is Amazon, whether it is Netflix, whether it is YouTube, they don't create the content, but they create the platform. As of today, the market capitalization of Netflix is said to be $452.82 billion. So the market capitalization of Netflix alone is significantly more, by $100 billion more than the whole of Nigeria's GDP. So what are we doing to create platforms? Technology is about creating platforms, and those who create the platforms get more income. They profit off, not those who create the content. So we have to be thinking about very clear strategic intent. We want to create platforms that will shift the content to our own platforms, and that way we can control the income. That way we own the income. That way we would quintuple, especially in this digital age, we'll be quintupling our GDP significantly faster. We do not want 3 out of the 4 major players in Nigeria's highly dense telecommunication space to be foreigners. We want at the minimum 3 out of 4 of such should be local players. Those are the things we have to get very intentional about. Remember, it all begins with vision, and then we can work it back to what are the talent management needs from curriculum all the way to early education, to middle-level education, to higher-level education, to policy education, to strategy education, to management education, to governance education. We begin to work it back to say, what are the talent management needs to now achieve the strategy? But we have to be very intentional. I strongly believe that one of the things we need to do with the National Innovation Strategy is to go after the platforms. I do not want to see the millions or the tens of millions of Nigerians adding to YouTube's income or adding to Netflix income that is bigger than that of the whole of Nigeria as a whole. Instead, I want to see Nigeria intentional about creating the platforms that will rival YouTube and rival Facebook and rival Netflix. And that way, we will profit significantly because those who create the platform get the income. They get the bulk of the income, not those who create the content, right? And that's why I said one of the things we need to do, as far as I'm concerned, is to take one of those. I mean, we don't have, especially at the beginning, we don't have to pursue too many things. We have to do a degree of strategic prioritization, like we always advocate for strongly in our strategy process in Amogate, right? So it's very important for us to say, okay, it's been said that Nigeria's major ICT players comprise of 4 activities, right? That is 1, telecommunications and information services. I've told you, as far as I'm concerned, Nigerians are underplaying in that sector. If we have 3 out of 4 of the major ICT players being foreign owned, or largely foreign owned, there is an issue. But that's another thing. That's another thing we have to focus on. But in terms of prioritization, from a policy and strategy point of view, the third part of these 4 main activities, which is motion picture, sound recording, and music production, that's entertainment, is one of the areas we could focus on, while still looking at how do we increase the participation of Nigerian-owned ICT companies in the telecommunications and information services. The other 2 activities, of course, are publishing, and the third one, broadcasting. And that, again, like I said, is becoming more and more digitized, and we have to also play in that area very strategically, very futuristically, in a very anticipatory manner. And we also have to say, what are the talent management needs? What kind of talent, what kind of skills and competencies do we need in very specific terms, right? How much of them do we have now, and how much of them would we need to close this digital gap, right? And then we have to work on something like the DIRA plan, which we shared last week, to develop, to implement, to review, and to adapt a talent management strategy for closing not just the gap in terms of Nigeria's digital economic contribution to GDP, but also the gap in terms of the GDP between Nigeria and other nations, right? So if you say, UK is a developing nation, I just give the example of India. Right? Sorry, if you say the UK is a developed nation, I just give the example of India. India is not necessarily at the level of development of the United Kingdom, yet their GDP is 10 times that of Nigeria. Well, I think it's on this note that we have to draw a curtain on today's edition of the program, right? And don't get me wrong, India is still growing because their GDP per capita is $2,484, which is significantly less than the UK's GDP per capita of about $848,000. So that still shows you that India has a lot of room for growth. But in terms of their total GDP, they've significantly surpassed Nigeria at about $3 trillion GDP, right? 3.55 trillion US dollars GDP, while Nigeria is just about an average of $350 billion GDP. These are things we truly have to go in, right? Nigeria has $362.8 billion in GDP, and that is not acceptable at all. Well, on this note, I want to thank you very much again for doing this with us. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for allowing us to discuss talent management strategies for national innovation systems. Thank you for allowing us to share our thoughts on how Nigeria can position itself along with other nations. I just used Nigeria as an example. Think about what you can do. It all begins with a vision, is what we emphasized last week and re-emphasized this week. Where do we want to go in terms of technology? Where do we want to go in terms of innovation? Beginning with the absorptive capacity. Now, what is the economic growth we want to attain, and what is the part that innovation, which we can control more, can play in helping us attain this economic growth and development, not just in terms of total GDP, but also in terms of GDP per capita, which is extremely important, right? Well, we will be back same time, same station next week, and we will move on to a separate something. Until then, I do not just want you to think innovation, I also want you to think national economic growth, extremely important. I want you to begin to think whether as a policymaker, as a policy influencer, or even as a policy demander, how can we ensure that we begin to compete, at the level of our capacity in terms of, the GDP. How do we, quintuple the GDP over the next 5 years? How do we position ourselves more strategically to play in the areas of digital economy where we are likely to achieve optimum productivity, right, and economic growth, like creating platforms, like synergizing our current content industry in media with the platforms where we can maximize our economic outcomes. Thank you very much again. I'll be back same time, same station next week. Until then, remember to follow us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Instagram, follow us on YouTube. You'll find Amoge Radio Communications. We have over 190 programs already uploaded. My colleagues will be back on their own subsequent episodes, rich, interesting, policy-laden, strategic, and also personal development content all the way through Friday. And you would be impacted, significantly enabled through this content, whether you're a nation, whether you're an institution, whether you're an organization or a leader or manager, as well as also an individual at the early levels of your career. We've got you all covered, right? Thank you so much again. And until then, remember, we're here to serve your policy needs as nations. We're here to serve your strategy needs as organization. We're here to develop your people. We have training arms. We have consulting arms. We are rich and thorough and broad and deep. And honestly, with Amogate, you are covered, and we are always building to endure. Also, check out our website, www.theamogate.org. Feel free to send us a mail, contact@theamogate.org. If you visit our website, you can always send us a message. We'll respond as promptly as possible. We are here to serve you. We are here to help you grow. We do not just talk policy, we implement. It's one of our greatest strengths, building the policy execution gap and bridging the strategy implementation gap. And we look forward to working with you. You are the reason we do this. And we look forward to partnering with you to help implement, to help grow, to help reconceptualize, and to help ensure that you are becoming the best you can be, and not even slightly marginally less. Also, I see you same time, same station next week. Remember, think economic growth and think innovative contributions to gargantuan economic leaps. Thank you so much, and see you next week. Have a good one.